No, this isn't a review for the Akira scale banana vans, although they do look very nice. So I wasn't exactly doing the banana splits when they were announced, and that's possibly because I couldn't see a reason to have them on my railway. I hadn't done any research on the banana van history or where they run, what era they ran in, or anything like that. So when they hit the shelves, I was still a little bit banoffee-pied that they weren't British Railway standard vans. Also, the price tag wasn't that appealing. So jump forward a few weeks, and just recently I was wandering aimlessly around the local model shop like I do on a regular basis, and something caught my eye, which was an old Wren banana wagon van. For the princely sum of £6.50, I decided to take a punt, and when I got home, turned out to be a little bit of a bargain, checking on eBay. Then the cogs in my mind started whirling around, and all of a sudden things started to look a little bit too familiar, because I realised that this is the exact same body shell that Dapol use on their current banana vans. This revelation was all it took to get me completely hooked, and I was in the books looking for everything that I could find on banana vans. To my surprise, there seemed to be an awful lot of text, but not very many pictures. But there was enough to get me going. And the next thing I did was order half a dozen unpainted bodies off of the Dapol website. For something that's 40 plus years old, they are pretty damn good. They're not 100% accurate, but I'd put that down to its initial concept, where they needed a big flat surface to print the numbers, which back in the day were quite large. I did wonder whether I could camouflage this patch with paint and shadowing methods to hide it. And then I thought, well, just chop it out. It wasn't easy, and it took a bit of time. Patience is the key. Although my Heath Robinson approach to tackling this problem probably wasn't the best, but I couldn't think of any other way of doing it. And you probably noticed that we've swapped from being a nice clean casting to a semi-stripped yellowish thing. That's because something happened halfway through this video. I'll explain that in a blog post that I'm currently working on. As with all kit builds, weight is always going to be an issue. But with this one, because it's a nice big box van, there's plenty of room to hide the lead weight and encapsulate it in a plastic off-cut box thing, so it doesn't move about. I put a false floor in the box van and then evened up the floor of the underside of the moulding, put the lead weight in with all its offcuts to keep it from moving about. There's an obvious drawback to what I've just done, but we'll tackle that when we come to put the roof on. The chassis of this project was always going to be the sticking point once I'd worked out that the body was okay and usable. As I mentioned before, Wren and Dapol use a generic chassis which goes under pretty much everything they've produced. And that's okay if you're not that bothered by it. But if you're a rivet counter, which I am not, and you know a little bit about these wagons and you want it to be sort of right, you need something that's going to be, well, right. After what seemed like an eternity racking my brains trying to think about where I could find a suitable chassis, it popped into my head that Red Panda, supplied by HA Models, was the way to go. I was convinced that I'd discovered something monumental, and I wanted to shout it aloud from off the top of a building or on social media. I restrained myself, and when I got the instructions out, it turns out that many people know this, except me. Because this isn't a kit build, so to speak, it's more of a coming together of various different parts from various different manufacturers. Nothing fitted together, so I had to guess. And the easiest way to do that was to mark out where I wanted the sole bars to go and then glue them on in an appropriate manner. I did think about putting spars across between the sole bars, but I haven't got an indexable cutter. And trying to do it by hand, even with the best will in the world, you end up with slightly shorter and longer ones. I've always wanted a big chopper, so I'll maybe put one on my Christmas list. The pencil marked guideline was probably the easiest way to do it. I eyeballed it in, making sure that the sole bars were 90 degrees to the floor and parallel to each other. It helps with the wheels inset. You can see whether they're leaning in or leaning out. With the glue on the sole bars still soft and malleable, I put the wagon on a glass surface, which is my kitchen scales, and that way you can see whether all four wheels touch. You'll see a shadow if it doesn't, and it's easy to adjust with the soft glue. As time moves on, everybody's modelling skills get better, including mine, which is sometimes a dangerous precedent to set, because I've now elected to start putting brake rigging onto all of my models. Not full brake rigging, just the crossbars that tie the brake shoes together. It will probably mean for some retailers that their sales of 0.5mm drills will go up considerably, because I've probably broke about 4 in the last month. Talk about braking. The moulding for the brake shoes actually touches the wheel as it sits off of the sprue. I think this is because these kit parts are quite old and the tolerances or the wheel sizes were considerably smaller when they were first produced. With more modern fine scale wheels, you need about a millimetre gap between the two parts after you've cut them in half and set them as close to the wheel as you can possibly get, which in itself is a little bit dangerous on this one because I'm using brass wire to connect the two brake shoes, which is a conductive material, and if too close will short out the tracks of your railway. The handbrakes were similarly treated with a piece of brass wire connecting them, and the final piece to go on was the vacuum cylinder, along with its actuating arm, which also had a small hole drilled in it. Couplings are always a dilemma for me. As much as I dislike tension lock couplings, I dislike all of the other options, which leaves me with these. I chose the one on the bottom left, which is the Symoba NEM pockets. To fix it, I filed a square on a piece of round styrene rod, plopped it in the hole, drilled a hole in the bottom of the wagon, and then adjusted for the right height. A bath in warm soapy water to get all the grease and crap off, and then onto the paint, where I'm going to use not black and not brown for base coats, no primer. Black for the roof and the underframe, brown for the body. No masking tape either between the body and the underframe. I thought I could just get away with it. I did use a few squares of masking tape though for some ghost patching, because in their later days, which is what I'm modelling them, all of the posters that were stuck to the sides denoting which traffics they were in were all removed. Some of them had just one post. Some of them had just one poster. Others had 2 or 3. Others had none. I've got 6 of these wagons on the go, so I thought I'd do them all differently as well. So some of the patches I'd take off after I'd put the bauxite main colour down on the body. Some of them I left until after I'd weathered. Before I get to weathering, I've got to glue the roof on and then do some decoration with some Railtec transfers. Set in place in the normal fashion with a little bit of warm water and then fixed with some setting solution and then a matte varnish. While doing this detailing, I took the opportunity to do one of my signature replacement buffers, painted the handbrake lever white, and then ponder about what I want these things to look like. Sometimes it's hard not to get drawn into making them look like wrecks on wheels, rust buckets if you like. Bear in mind that the body of this wagon is mostly wood, plywood, so there's only a fair amount of what you can do with it. There's the fading and worn out parts, which is why I'm only giving them a dark wash, making sure there's plenty of pigments that drop in between all of the details. I did give the chassis a good going over with some pigments because there isn't any wagon that I've ever seen that doesn't look like, it's got superficial rust all over the bottom of it. I also gave the corrugated ends a light going over as well, just so they were discoloured from the normal bauxite of the main body. I'll say this again because I think it's sort of relevant, that once upon a time I didn't give pigments a second look. Once I started using them on a regular basis, there's like a staple and a necessity, because you can do so much with them and they change the colours of everything vastly with little effort as well. It's really easy to do. I thought I'd individualise some of these wagons as well by giving some of them replacement springs by painting them a sort of lighter shade of black, and then others I gave some wet effects on the axle boxes as if they'd been just recently oiled. Now one of my pet hates, silver buffers. These have got oleo pneumatic buffers, which means they can be painted silver. Hurrah! Before we put these into traffic, I'm going to do a little bit of totting up to see how much I've actually spent on these things and see if it's anywhere close to being near the Akira scale ones. And they are £84.95 per pack of 3, which equates to £28.31 roughly each. So my initial purchase of that Wren wagon was £6.50, and then we came to the Dapol unpainted bodies, the red Panda chassis, brass bearing cups, Bachmann 3-hole disc wheels, Railtec transfers, Bachmann couplings, and that came to a total of, drumroll please, £16.95 per van. Well, depending on how you work it out, I spent £101.74 total, divided by 6 is £16.95. But if you break it down into component parts, it comes out at £15.02. So it's a figure somewhere in the middle of that, which is pretty reasonable, really. Was it worth it? Well, obviously, because it exposed me as a serial dad joker with some really rubbish banana jokes. That's about it for this one. These vans have gone into revenue earning service. The next video is going to be, it's going to be one of two things. It's going to be a rescue mission for some of my old mail vans, TPOs, or it's going to be a kit build for some Airfix SO tank wagons. Until then, thanks for watching. See you next time.